Mohammed Hosni Mubarak, a symbol of stability and moderation to his admirers, a symbol of dictatorship to his critics. Trained as a fighter pilot in the Soviet Union, Mubarak gradually climbed through the ranks, taking command of Egypt's Air Force shortly before the 1973 Yom Kippur War, when Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack on Israel. 2 years later, President Anwar Sadat appointed Mubarak vice president. 6 years after that, in 1981, he became president following the assassination of Sadat at the hands of Islamic militants. Mubarak was with Sadat on that dramatic day and only narrowly escaped the assassin's bullets himself. As president, Mubarak fought a long and bloody war against Islamic militants bent on toppling his regime. The struggle climaxed in 1997 when militants massacred more than 60 people, mostly European and Japanese tourists. In the wake of the attack, Egypt's security forces crushed the militants, while human rights groups accused the Mubarak regime of widespread torture and abuse. President Mubarak was a regular guest at the White House, and Egyptian troops made up the largest Arab contingent in the U.S.-led multinational force that drove the Iraqi army out of Kuwait in 1991. But friendship had its limits. 12 years later, Mubarak declined to join President George W. Bush's U.S.-led coalition against Saddam Hussein, and he reacted coolly to Bush's calls for democratic reform in the Arab world. But under intense pressure from Washington, Mubarak began to ease his grip on power. In September 2005, Egypt had its first-ever multi-candidate presidential election. While his opponents, the Muslim Brotherhood, made some gains, Mubarak still held firmly onto power. That was until growing discontent over corruption, police brutality, and economic inequality boiled over on January 25, 2011, when a group of young activists using social media organized an uprising that took the regime by surprise. What followed was 18 days of mounting nationwide protests, calling for his resignation. Human rights organizations estimated more than 800 protesters were killed in clashes with police and supporters of Mubarak. But the tide had turned. The movement against Mubarak only grew. A military man to the end, Mubarak vowed he would not shirk his duty as president of Egypt. But on February 11th, he finally stepped down, and millions of Egyptians took to the streets in wild celebration. A year and a half later, a Cairo court handed Mubarak a life prison sentence for his role in the death of protesters during the uprising. Barely 7 months later, an appeals court reversed that decision, and a frail Mubarak was set free with little fanfare or opposition 6 years after the uprising that toppled him.